let's jump right into it. First, I'm going to kind of run through the life process of an application and how it turns into a grant agreement. And then following that, Tara will be jumping more in depth into the fiscal part. But basically at OWEB, we consider a grant as a grant, and we don't, and what we mean by that is that our grants all follow specific pathways. We have an application, we have a review process, we have an award process, we have a grant agreement, we have grant agreement implementation, then we have grant closeout. All of our grants follow that basic formula, even though we have quite a lot of different types. One thing I really hope comes clear from this training is that an application and successful grant agreement implementation is a partnership among staff. It's not just the fiscal person, it's not just the project manager, it's the project management folks and the fiscal folks working together. It takes really good communication and understanding of roles. And so I always encourage fiscal folks to drag their project managers to the training and vice versa. What happens, one of the reasons I stress that is many times what happens is the first time that the person doing the fiscal sees the application is when a signed grant agreement's dropped on their desk with a stack of bills, followed by the project manager saying, the vendors are breathing down my neck and you need to get us some money from OWEB ASAP. Which then is usually followed by you going, okay, wish I would have known, which then is usually followed by you submitting a fund request, and then at this time, usually hear back from your OWEB project manager saying, hey, before I can process it, I need the permits, the landowner agreements, the land use form, evidence of secured match. Oh yeah, and Exhibit B, I need some maps of some photo points and some photos, and then I can process it. And at that point, your fiscal person is usually ready to go on break. So as I said, I really encourage both the fiscal and the project managers, to really work together and communicate well. So the journey begins with your project application. Your organization has spent months meticulously putting together an online application. The online application, of course, is the most simple part of that. We don't have a rigorous application with lots of questions and things like that. It's pretty simple. Our online application process is pretty involved, and we have a lot of questions, and a lot of it's really tied to needs around our evaluation criteria. I want to remind folks that when you fill out the application, there is a feedback button. So if you use that feedback button, that information goes to this crack expert team of staff that's just waiting to review the feedback you send and help use it to craft a better online application experience. While they like to hear things are working awesome, they really also want to hear what's not working, or if there's suggestions about how better to make things work. So please use that feedback button. So after you've hit submit in your application, the deadline closes, the review process kicks off. And this typically consists of staff conducting a eligibility threshold review of the applications, numbering the applications, then providing the reviewers with the links to the applications, and the review process begins. Reviewers look at each of the applications according to the eligibility criteria, and then their review culminates in a meeting where the review team gets together to evaluate and make recommendations on the project. This is followed by our board making funding decisions. And after the funding decision is made in your favor, these are some of the things you can expect. So OWEB staff will be working on drafting your grant agreement. You may receive a notification via email that edits are required on your application. At this point, you'd go back into the online application system and make the requested edits to your application. Edits are usually requested for a few reasons. One, during a fiscal review, budget amounts or budget line items were found in the wrong categories and need to be moved. Another could be that metrics put into your application might need to be moved or adjusted to better fit your scope of work. There could be a review team or staff recommendations that might require an edit. And lastly, sometimes the Department of Justice makes recommendations that we have to implement, sometimes using an edit to the application. So once the edits are done, your OWEB project manager finalizes drafting the grant agreement. It goes into an internal review in both the grant and fiscal programs. Once it's made it through that process, if it's over 150K, it goes to the Department of Justice for review and signature. If it doesn't need that review, it's then sent to you, to the grantee, for signature, which you do, and then return back to OWEB, and then a signed copy of the version is sent back to you. It's worth noting that we date grant agreements to start the date of the award. So the date that the board makes a decision is the date that you'll have the grant agreement dated for. That means you can start incurring expenses at that date. However, you cannot do a fund request until after the grant agreements has been signed by all parties, and then just making sure that you have whatever permits or other documentation in hand.
You might mention that the grant agreement is held up if they have outstanding reports.
Thank you. As Leilani just graciously reminded me, if you have any outstanding reports that are owed to OWEB, whether it's a small grant, an open solicitation, a FIP, a weed, or any other grant type, we won't release the grant agreement until that report has been submitted and approved. So one of the best things you can do in advance is make sure your reports are all caught up. Please, please, please read your entire grant agreement when you get it. Read the whole thing, but pay special attention to page 1. Page 1 will have important dates, fund source information. It could be a state grant, it could be a federal grant, or it could be a mix of both state and federal funds. The staff contact information as well as reporting dates are going to be identified there. Exhibit B or A is where your budget information is found. Exhibit B is where any special conditions such as progress reporting, split fund source agreement requirements, BABA, which is Buy American conditions, and any other special report conditions for your grant will be found there. Following Exhibit B, you've got standard requirements that are usually in every grant. They'll include things like project completion reporting requirements. Those can be found in Exhibit C. Exhibit C also may include, if it's a restoration grant, or it will include, if it's a restoration grant, a reporting requirement to put it onto the ORI, or the Watershed Restoration Inventory database. Post-project reporting will be found in Exhibit D, followed by exhibits which may contain information on permits and landowner agreement requirements. We'll get into some more of the specifics when we talk about first and final payment requests, but that gives you kind of overview of that. And after you have the grant agreement in place, that's when the project implementation will begin, with the fund request, the project reporting, and culminating in the final payment request and project completion report, followed by any of the post-project reporting. So I've gone on long enough with this. How about next slide, and I'll turn it over to Tara.
Okay, so hi everybody, I'm Tara, and I'm going to do a couple of logistics things. Excuse me, a logistic things before I launch into mine. Mark, can you admit anybody who comes in? Keep an eye on that. And if
Absolutely.
you could make Katie Duzick a co-host, that way she can help monitor the chat and the sound and all the other good stuff. I would greatly appreciate that.
Okay, I'll assume she'll send me $20 in the mail then for that privilege.
All right.
So I will make
Sounds
Katie.
good.
You got it, Mark.
So we have a big group today, which is great. Again, I do better with it being interactive. So be sure to post your comments in the chat or unmute yourself and ask. It's all good. So I know most of your names, or at least a lot of the names that have been coming in. There's a possibility that I've talked to you or somebody from OWEB has talked to you over the last few months, but I'm hoping that everybody here knows that we have moved to online payment requests and it is going really well. Right now we are running about 2/3 of the total payments are coming in through the online payment system. And the rest of them are, about the rest of the third are coming in via the paper process. So online payments are deliberately as easy as we can make them. There's basically 4 steps. You navigate to your dashboard, you click the request button, you fill out the request, and then you upload your documents and you sign. Navigating to the dashboard. So you're going to enter OGMIS and you're going to click on that dashboard link. And then you hopefully, and I'm pretty sure you will go to a page that looks something like this, and it will have a list of all of your grants. What you're going to do then is you're going to go to the request box of the project that you wish to request payment on. And once inside the grant, you're going to click the payment request there. Okay, once there, you are going to fill in your requested amount and your amount spent, or the amount of receipts, or any other way that we can explain what this box means. And we're going to talk about that a little bit. But basically, it's what's happened since the last time you asked for money. So you're going to fill out those 2. You're going to write a brief statement on your project progress. We're going to talk about that. And then you're going to move down the page. Ooh, I put an arrow in there. Who knew? And then you're going to move down the page and you're going to upload an expense tracking sheet. And then you're going to upload supporting documentation such as your receipts and invoices over $250, or your salary, wages, and benefits backup, or travel logs, or things like that. And then last but not least, you are going to sign down here. You're going to enter the name of the person filling out the form, and you're going to hit submit. That is really all there is to it. We're going to pause here. We're going to take a little stretch break, and we're going to see if anyone has any questions before we move on to the details of the battling boxes. Yes, Heather.
Hi, I'm Heather at the Hood River SWCD, and I had a question. If you're doing an advance, would you click the box? You would put in how much money you were requesting, but then it would be like 0 amount spent?
Exactly. Perfect.
Great. And good question, because we had someone else just ask that in the chat. So it must have been on everyone's minds. And then Tara, we also have a question about financial reports. Can they be from the accounting system? And I'm assuming, Nathan, you mean like running a QuickBooks report or something like that and sticking it in. Is that accurate?
Yeah, or directly from our accounting system, as opposed to filling out the old forms, the old Excel expense tracking sheets and such.
Yeah, we are thrilled with accounting reports. Thrilled, I tell you. We want this to be easy, and we are just as capable of reading an accounting report as an Excel sheet. We're multifaceted that way. Now, this is where you get to see me multitask. And I'm going to be honest with you here. This may or may not work out. So give me some grace here.
Okay, hey Tara, can you pause for just 1 second? Because we had another question come in. Takes a little while to type. So the question is, are we allowed to have multiple users for our organization within the system? One for fiscal, say, and one for other program staff?
Okay, I understand the question. And it's a great question. And unfortunately, the answer right now is no. Each organization has one login. Now you can have multiple people getting emails in different roles, but it's all one login. I'm going to disclose that we are discussing that, but because of the way the system was originally designed, right now there's no functionality for that. And I can go into this more, but the short answer is no.
All right, thank you, Tara.
Okay. So right now, the number one question that we're getting about online payments is, what is that second box? And we're having to turn back payments again, kind of what is that second box? Most people understand this requested amount, no problem. Hey, that's, write the check for this amount. What this box over here is about telling us about the expenses that you've had since your last payment request. Okay. So what I think that people are missing in this conversation is actually above where the boxes are. And it has to do with this box up at the very top of the page, where it shows fiscal amounts and it shows your grant amount, your paid to date, your requested to date, which can be different if you just submitted a request, your receipts, and then your balance. Okay. I think people are just missing that box, and they're not understanding that that box is fundamental to what the OWEB fiscal staff are asking you to put into these boxes.
Yeah, Tara, so there was a question earlier and I was waiting for you to pause. It's about the expense tracker and whether it needs to show all of the categories, even if they are zero, because a lot of folks' QuickBooks, won't show categories if no expenses were incurred during that time. And Leilani answered it saying, no, it does not need to show all the categories if there aren't any expenses.
This box is a direct reflection, taking the information above, and then you enter enough expenses in here that in the end, at the end of the request, that box that we talked about that is above is going to reflect this total amount spent from your accounting report. Now, I'm sure that's clear as mud. So what we're going to do is we're going to have some quizzes. So everybody get out your calculators, and we're going to we're going to do some math, and I'm going to show you what I'm looking for. All right. And as a prize, you're going to get chocolate at the end, just like this.
Tara, while you're running up your quiz, can I ask you a question that's popped up in the box? Confusion about the fiscal amounts boxes, and I think Leilani answered it, but it's important, so I want to reiterate that. Will the fiscal amounts boxes run the numbers on their own, or do the grantees need to do it manually? And yes, I see you shaking your head, and Leilani had a similar reaction. No, unfortunately, we have to enter the amounts ourselves. And then a follow-up question to that is, so is the amount spent box the total for the lifetime of the grant, or is it just the amount spent since the last request?
It is just the amount spent since the last request. By going through our quizzes here, I'm going to be able to demo exactly what we're talking about.
Okay, that sounds good. And then I think,
so you're making a first payment, and your grant amount is $15K, and you haven't had any paid to date, you haven't had any requested to date, and you haven't had any receipts. All right. This that just came up is your accounting report, and you can see here that you have spent $12,000 to date. So what numbers are you going to put under requested amount and amount spent? All right, now I'm sincerely hoping that math question 1 has come up on your screen. and you're going to type in, you know, what feels right to you. Those are numbers that there are numbers. That is not my job. Answered 4%, which, you know, honestly, I hear you folks, and there you go. However, that is not the right answer. The requested amount is I think $1, and the amount spent is $12,000. The $12,000 number that had 3 answers. I'm not 100% sure that that was the correct answer there. Number 3 was make sure all items from the grant agreement have been provided. That again got 3 answers. And you know what, folks? That was actually your correct question. It was a trick question. But most people did get the correct amounts because they did do the math correctly and did that. This is where I show you what the numbers were. And then I inform you that there was a trick. It was a trick question because it is a first payment, and you did have to turn in the first payment items. So I can either go backwards depending on. I can either go backwards depending on questions, or I can give it to Mark and Katie to talk about first payment items. Which would be the better plan, Katie?
I think, Tara, there was only just one question that cropped up during that exercise, and it was about, in most cases, would the amount requested equal the amount spent? And I think that that would be fair to say yes in most cases. However, the example that Tara just provided about the advance would certainly be one place that that wouldn't align. And then also sometimes with a 10% holdback, not to get too complicated, sometimes we're not able to request the full amount that we've spent. And I think that's the examples that I have. Is that a good thing to say, Tara? Okay, she's nodding. So I was going to just cover briefly the first payment items. And so this is a common thing that happens with our grantees. Oh, we're so excited, we're going to get going on our project. And then the first payment request is submitted. And then people are very disappointed when their project manager from OWEB gets back to them and says, oh, actually, there's a few extra requirements that we need in order to pay your first request. And Tara, can you go back to the slide that we were, there we go. Okay, so all of these things can be found in your grant agreement. All restoration projects require permits, copies of permits submitted to your OWEB project manager before you can begin. And we rely on our grantees to tell us what permits are needed for a project. OWEB project managers have familiarity with the permitting process, but we don't really, we're not a regulatory agency, so we don't govern what permits are needed. So we might be able to talk to you about a permitting pathway, but not provide surety or advice. That is up to the grantee to tell us what's needed. Sometimes permit documents can be really lengthy, so it's okay to just send us a copy, say, of the first page of the cover letter of your Army Corps permit for our files. That is perfectly acceptable to do. There may be times when we can release funds for activities within a project that do not require a permit, and that should be worked out with your project manager. So if you think you're in a bit of a conundrum with work not being able to happen for some time while you work on your permits, but you have other project elements, say planting, that can move forward before you get all the permits for the entirety of your project, then that's something that you'd want to talk with your project manager about, and we can figure out a good approach to make it work. Landowner agreements, those are always required for all restoration projects or TA or monitoring projects that require site access. And so you'll want to be sure to meet the OWEB requirements. Those are in the grant. And we have some examples online about what an acceptable landowner agreement looks like. In your special conditions, you may have another comment about your landowner agreement. That can sometimes be related to if your project is on public land. Sometimes there's different requirements there. We do accept different types of landowner agreements for public land ownership, or also if you own the property, if you're a land trust doing work on property that you own, you can provide a letter that meets the requirements of providing OWEB staff access to look at the project and other things. So proof of match, that's another first payment item that we do require. Lots of times that that match proof can be found within the application. So you might want to go back and refresh your memory by opening up the original application to see if you provided the match at that time as secured. And if you did, you have nothing more to do there. You can just go on and submit your request knowing the match is in the application. If not, if it wasn't there, if it was listed as pending, most OWEB projects require 25%. You can provide that match to us via the handy dandy match form on our website, or you can also just submit a letter or an email from the source of the match. It just has to have the project name and it has to have a dollar amount. Those are two important things. Restoration projects require pre-project photos and photo point maps. And those can sometimes also be found in the application, but we do require them to be assigned photo point numbers and be able to see where those are on the map. And this is just a nice way for us to track where the funds went and what transpired with our public investment. And lots of times in the past, we had missing photos or laptops that crashed and staff changes and no one could find the photos. So now it seems maybe like a pain to do this up front before you get started on your grant, but it's nice to know that OWEB staff are holding on to those in a safe place so we can make sure that when it's time to submit the final report, those are all there where they're supposed to be. And then the last item here, other items is called out in the grant agreement. Generally, you would check your conditions of agreement, also known as Exhibit B, if there's something else that might be required. And I just want to reiterate that it's really nice for when grantees take the time up front to look through their grant agreement and their application to figure out what's missing, because OWEB project managers generally have a lot of grants to manage. And so when we get a first request, it takes us some time to go back through and look through everything. So we always appreciate when people are prepared and are aware of these requirements and are able to send them to us ahead of time. And as far as providing them to us, an email to your project manager with these attached as PDFs is perfectly acceptable and welcome. So thank you. And then somebody is wondering if a documents section will be added to the dashboard at a later time to have a centralized space for document submission. And I think that's an excellent idea, but I'm not sure if that's in the works. Any OWEB staff know? I like it though.
I think it's definitely something that we've heard. I mean, it's just that it's going to be a question of priorities on that one. It's also, there's also a small manner of what's public facing versus what's private facing. There are some things that, while everything with OWEB is public on a public information request, there are some things that we just don't want to make it, really easy to see, such as the names and addresses of landowners. No more trick questions. I can't really promise because, as you've probably seen, I already forgot what I wrote, but I don't think I have any more zebras in this presentation. We have an advance. This is the first payment request. You have not had any expenses. You have not, and you don't have any receipts. You just need the money to get, you need some money to get in the bank to get going. All right. So what are you going to place in these boxes? So I'm going to go ahead and end poll, and you guys are officially too clever for me. Most of you put the right answer. If you were wanting that $12,000 and you didn't have amount spent, that's exactly how you would enter things. That's why that would be one reason the boxes would be different. In this question, you have been paid that this is after what we just talked about. You've been paid this $12,000, and now you have expenses to back up the $12,000. So the question is, what would you put in the two boxes? So if we need to pause here, we will. Most of you got the answer, or what I thought the answer would be correct. Correct in the sense that you would type in 0% for the, or $0 for the requested amount and $12,054 for the receipt amount. However, a significant portion of you, it says about 19%, would have put the same thing in both. And I'm hoping that you can see here that if you put 12,000 here and 12,000 here, what you would have ended up getting is requesting like a total of $24,000 and providing receipts for. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, this is one thing I don't like about the Zoom is that I can't really get feedback, but I'm going to assume from the, there's not new chats and nobody's raising their hand that we're okay. And then there was one comment, do I just count the receipts I'm attaching? Sometimes we are getting these questions about like, if you have like a $5 receipt and a $10 receipt and then a $12,000 receipt, people will only type in the $12,000 receipt. And we're looking for that total amount spent since last report. We are now doing a second or further on payment. Again, you can see here that you have your grant amount, you have your amount spent to date, you have your receipts, and you're putting up your expense report here. And since the last time you've asked for money, you've had some more money spent. So our question is, what are we going to put in these two boxes? So this is where, and again, Katie, I'm really going to have to get your help on this. About the same number of people selected option 1 and option 3. The answer is that you were supposed to put in $6,054 in both the amount requested and the amount spent. Because if you take up here at the very top of your screen and you're looking at those receipts and those paid to date, and then you're looking at your accounting report, you're reporting the difference between those numbers. Okay. I'm curious, this answer, the requested amount, $6,054, and the amount spent, $12,054. We are getting that a lot in actual payments that are coming through. And it's not where we're wanting to go. And that if I can get one thing across in this training, it's going to be that, like I said, we're really asking you to do some math, and we're asking you to report so that in the end, after we process the payment, that you're going to have that top box, those fiscal amounts reflect what's on your accounting report. So we're going to move on to a slightly more complicated one. So we have a council capacity grant that has been paid for just over $46,000 to date, and they have reported receipts of $51,000. Okay. And you know what? I think I have messed up this balance again. So we're just going to completely ignore that Tara can't do math either. They've turned in their tracking sheet, and now they have $53,000 of expenses to report. One thing that you should know is that $15,362.50 is the quarterly amount of money that once a quarter you get paid that amount of money. The question has to do, what are we going to do about the amount spent? Considering that we have to get this number, we have to get the receipts number now to match that number. So I'm going to go ahead and launch a poll. So the answer here I was looking for was that you're requesting $15,362.50, and you're reporting new receipts or new expenses of $2,130.90. 33% of people got the question correct. And the remaining remaining people got some version of the question incorrect. With the most concerning being that we're still getting the 15,000, and we're still getting people who are wanting to turn in the amount spent of 53,000, reporting this entire amount again. What can I do to help explain what we're looking for?
Hey, Tara, this is Liesl Coleman.
Hi, Liesl.
Hi, I just sent you a suggestion in the chat box that maybe the best thing to do would be to change the verbiage under amount spent to amount spent since last funds request.
Okay. So if we, that's a great suggestion. And if we assume that if this group that's here assumes that it now says that, is the concept that I'm trying to get to a little easier to understand for everybody?
Question, Tara, about this was a follow-up on this whole idea of asking for the quarterly expenses. And it is, are you saying that we should be generally requesting the quarterly amount with or without receipts?
My response is that is a question that you guys get to decide.
The next set of questions that are in the chat pertain to the slide that you have on the screen now. The first question is, why would we ask for $15,362.50 if we only had receipts for $2,130? And I'll let Tara answer this, even though I actually know the answer to this one, but go ahead, Tara.
Okay. Well, again, having to do with what we were just talking about. Again, I worked on the assumption, putting this question together, that everybody would ask for the most they could get each quarter. For the purposes of this question, I mean, it looks like this is maybe through fourth quarter. Fourth quarter would be 1 year. That would be about in the neighborhood of $60,000. And the mere fact that you hadn't spent $7,000 so far really wouldn't, I wouldn't think that would be a big deal. I mean, it's council capacity. You guys are going to spend it. Does that seem like an appropriate answer? I mean, something that you can do.
Yeah, so basically you're only asking for $2,130, but you're also requesting an advance for the remainder up to your quarterly amount. So one more question. So can grantees ask for anything without receipts? So I never have to show that I use the money?
OWEB does allow advances. That doesn't mean that we're automatically going to approve them. So, if you're in a situation, and I'm talking about a regular restoration or technical assistant or whatever, grant, where, your contractors are lined up and you want to pay them as quickly as possible, you can ask for the amount that you're going to need to pay them, and then turn right around and once you pay them, provide us the invoices. We have a 10% holdback on grants so that we can make sure that you've spent all the money we provided. With things like capacity grants, which is what we're looking at, and that is an entire kettle of fish. There's an elaborate process to make sure that what we have paid you is what you spent. But because, again, we're paying ahead for quarter three, but you're just ending quarter two. So there's always that, kind of time and motion situation with those grants.
I wanted to add to that, Tara, that your advance you can have for 120 days. After your 120 days, you have to get us receipts and a tracking spreadsheet for your receipts, or you will get a letter from OWEB requesting it. And if you don't answer that letter, then your grant will be put on hold and you won't be able to get any payments for anything until that's covered.
Leilani is as usual 100% correct. Advances, we do allow them, but I forgot that, you have 120 days to show your spending on that. Because, we just said we're having problems with this as a concept. What I'm going to do is I'm going to move backwards a little bit. We're going to go to this advanced slide, okay, where we talked about the grant amount is $5,000. You haven't had anything paid to date. You haven't had anything requested to date. You have had no receipts to date, and you want to get $12,054.
Is the balance line item calculated on receipts or paid to date?
The grant amount, the balance is going to be what has been paid to date. Excuse me, the grant amount less what has been paid to date. Okay, so if you have a request pending for $10,000 that's, going to be paid out tomorrow, that will not show up yet. We were talking about this advance, and like I said, we were up here and we were looking at these boxes, like I said, and these boxes are really what people need to look at when they're making these payments. When we talked about resolving an advance a little bit later, and we talked about, we didn't ask for money because we wanted this amount spent, and using the verbiage that Liesl suggested, let's call that box amount spent since last request. That's when you're going to ask that $12,054. So moving forward, when you have that second payment, and again, you're wanting to have, your requested amount, paid to date less the amount spent, plus your receipts to date to make amount spent. With all that being said, what I'm going to do is, we've already talked about council capacity. And fortunately, my next one is district capacity. So we're kind of going to have the same thing. And I'm going to hope that our percentages increase here. All right. So for this, we have a grant amount of $175,813. Paid to date is $72,522.89. This organization has provided $38,247.48 in receipts. Okay, so you can see here that they're operating on an advance. Okay, this organization now is providing a tracking sheet that shows they have spent $52,529.80 to date. When they're asking for their next quarterly payment, and this is the amount of their next quarterly payment, for this amount spent, in order to make this amount spent less this receipts match, what number would we put in there? So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to end this, and I am thrilled beyond measure that most people got it correct this time. We were asking for the difference in amount spent. We were asking for the difference of $52,529.80, which is their total spent, less their reported receipts of $38,247.48. So good job, everybody. Okay, yay. One last note, if you're requesting a final payment for your grant, please be sure to push this little box. It helps us out a great deal. Thank goodness I get to stop talking now. I get to give this over to Katie or Amy or Mark, and I can go take a break.
Thanks, Tara. I'll take it over for a few minutes. So this is items that are due with your final funds request, and similar to a first payment request, there's a list of items needed for the final payment request. You'll submit your final list of expenses, including the tracking and any supporting documentation, just like the other funds requests. A budget amendment may be needed if you're shifting 10% of the overall grant, it's cumulative, of the overall grant award among budget categories, or if you're adding funds to a budget category that was not in your grant agreement. Ideally, this would be something that you've discussed with your project manager prior to the final funds request. Additional items that will be needed include any special conditions in Exhibit B in the grant agreement. So make sure you look back at the agreement. Katie talked about this in the beginning for the first payment request, but look back at your agreement. There could be items that need to be included in the final report, like a juniper management plan or a grazing management plan, and that will need to be submitted with the final report. So another item will be reporting of match. That will be part of the project completion report. And then any projects that use federal funds, you'll fill out the federal lobbying and litigation certificate. Project completion report will be due, which is done online through Augmus, and you'll find requirements of that in Exhibit C of your grant agreement. You may be required to submit a final project photos as well if it's applicable to your type of grant. For restoration projects, you'll be required to submit reporting through the Oregon Watershed Restoration Inventory, OWRI, and then any non-restoration projects will need a final metrics form. And I think that covers those. So when you're submitting your final funds request, these are all of the things that we'll be looking for to approve that final funds request. And I think there's a question. Do we need to do a budget amendment if costs have shifted more than 10% on capacity grants?
The short answer is yes. I think that would be a good plan. My long answer would be talk it over with your project manager. Your project manager is going to be the one who ultimately, looks it over and, makes a decision about, what's necessary and stuff like that.
Let me add one thing, Amy.
Yeah.
I get questions because a lot of times I'll get, and this has to do with everything but a capacity grant. I'll get questions that, hey, I submitted my final fund request, but you guys haven't processed it yet. In how we process the final request is first, before we'll process the payment request, we'll actually process the final completion report. And so that'll be reviewed by your project manager and your project manager's supervisor. And then once it's made it through those two checks, then the final fund request will be processed. And so a lot of times we'll get the fund request maybe a month or two in some cases ahead of the final report, but we'll hold on to it until we've actually processed the final report before we'll process the final request.
Okay.
We have another question. For an advance, do you still have to have all of the first payment items, permits, landowners, agreement, et cetera, before or along with the advance request?
You do, yes.
Okay, Tara, I'll turn it back to you.
All right. Well, excitingly, you guys get the reward of chocolate. You're still here. Yay! Okay. If only I would, if we were in an in-person training, I would be throwing chocolate now, which many of you know that I do in actual real life, but I will have to owe you chocolate until the next time I see you. So we're moving forward at the speed of light. I'm thinking about having this slide memorialized because it's been very popular. People ask me all the time, what is the timeline for a payment? Once you turn in a payment, it goes to the project manager, and they have site visits and vacations and board meetings and stuff. And I think most of them try really, really, really hard to process payment requests within a working week. So I'm going to say 1 to 7 days there. But I wouldn't expect it to be a overnight kind of thing in general. Okay. And remember that they can then send it back to you and say, wait, I need something else. Once they send it on to fiscal, believe it or not, we have learned how to pick the locks that they use to chain us to our desks. And occasionally we go on vacation. And I also have a couple of other things right now that are just keeping me really busy. And so sometimes it'll take me a few. We've learned to pick our locks and run away from our desk. And I personally have been very busy and on other projects. And so it can take me, a few days before I get to your payment. So again, I would say at least a working week just to be safe. Once it has been approved by fiscal, one of OEB's senior managers approves it, and they're required to do that by the end of the day on Mondays. And then Tuesdays, we send what we call the batch over to the state system. Wednesdays, payments are created, and then direct deposits will usually happen on Thursdays, or checks will be mailed out on a Thursday. So the moral of this story is, the word advance has come up a lot. I think that you should, look it over and be like, okay, what in the next 3 weeks, what is happening that I might need money for? Because it is not an instant, in spite of the fact that it may or may not be quicker with online payments, it is not an instantaneous process.
There's another question in the chat, Tara. How do I set up direct deposit?
So what I would encourage you to do is go onto our webpage, and there is in the middle column of our webpage, there is a box that is labeled manage, like grant management place. You're going to find forms, you're going to find information. That's your happy place. There is a box in there that says manage your grant. You're going to click on that, and then there's a link to our direct payment, the state's direct payment setup. If you have any questions, contact either Leilani or myself, and we'll guide you through it and get you to the right place. It is a statewide system, so we can only do so much, though. And it is. I think that there's an official signature involved and some stuff like that. But once you get set up, it's pretty quick. So this is where I just get to run polls, but Mark and his team get to talk about the other part of online payments that have been a slight challenge. Okay. And that is the mystery box. Okay.
Actually, the mystery box is to help solve a mystery, but I'll go ahead and start, and then I think each of us has a couple examples. So the mystery box, or the why do we ask for a brief statement on project progress since the last request or significant milestones achieved. So this is one of the areas, as I mentioned earlier, where it's really super helpful to have the fiscal person working really close with the project manager, because the project manager is probably going to be the one that's going to know best. And one of the good reference tools for helping fill this out is actually looking at the objectives and your work timeline that you have in your application. So that's where we're going to use it. So this box really is a tool for OWEB project managers to use when looking at the fund request. It helps identify expenses that are or maybe not associated with work activities. Things that may not be associated with the work activities you mentioned may get a little bit closer scrutiny. We just want to make sure that it's a legitimate project expense. The box gives us a snapshot of where the project is at currently in its implementation stage. We can compare it to the project scope of work and timeline to get a sense of how the requested funds and project work line up. I'll also let you know, and I was a little surprised, it only has a 500 character limit. And so it's and so you got to be, and that's why it says brief, but we also like you to be briefly descriptive in the box. So and just one other thing worth noting, it's not a substitute for a project report. Exhibit B might have requirements for progress reporting. This currently isn't a substitute for your progress reporting. It may morph into that in the future, but right now they're different tools, and so we use them differently. So it's not a substitute for that. So did we have examples, Tara? Okay, great. So this is an example, and I think this is the one that busted the 500 limit word. Oh, I see you made it into a quiz. So I wrote it up, and Tara immediately let me know I went over the 500 character limit, and so you can actually see the corrected version with it. What this does is this one is really easy to follow because it ties to the scope of work in the make-believe application, and it kind of lets us know where the tasks are and when they've been completed. If I was going to make this better, what I would probably add a sentence at the end, of course, cutting it down for the 500 word limit, but basically saying, and what we're actually billing for in this fund request are costs associated with permitting and final design. So as a project manager, I get a look at it. I can see that, what work's been done, the timeline, what's being planned, and what you're actually asking for funding for in the request. All right. Looks like a question popped up in chat. Let me.
Yes, Mark, the question is, well, I think first of all, we're going to get to Karen's question about what's expected for council capacity grants. So Hank, sit tight. We have an example for that. But then there's another question about what type of description. Oh, sorry. It's also about capacity. So
okay.
Yeah, hang on. We'll get to capacity.
We'll get to capacity in a minute. And then there's actually two examples for a restoration project. The second paragraph is actually for a different project. Again, it follows what the scope of work and the timeline were in the application. Again, if I was going to improve this, I would add a sentence at the end that says we are billing for costs associated with site preparation activities. That way, again, the project manager gets a sense of what's been completed, where you're at, and then what you're specifically requesting in this billing cycle. So, all right, we're going to either move to monitoring or capacity. So I will turn it over to either Amy or Katie.
In the description, it says brief statement on project process since last request or significant milestones achieved. So project process is what we're going to discuss next, as shown by this example. Project implementation is ongoing. And this is the council capacity. This is the council capacity example.
And basically, the part that's redlined is an example of what we don't want to see. If you send us something that says project implementation is ongoing, we'll probably kick it back to you and ask for additional information.
Yeah, and something like this is really perfect and succinct. You can let us know that you use the expenses for routine organizational expenses. And then maybe you did something that wasn't routine with your capacity grants. Maybe you made a purchase from one of your other budget categories. It's worth noting that briefly here in this box. And yeah, so just keep it simple, but kind of let us know what you did during that period that you're requesting the funds for. You don't have to clearly write an epic novel since we only have 500 characters, but helping us understand the nature of the request is good. And I also want to just mention that I know this might feel like something else that you have to do, but it just helps us know what's going on with your project. And I think the goal for this is to not require as many kind of formal progress reports with your grant agreement, since what we're hoping instead is that these brief summaries provided with each payment request can then reduce or eliminate the need for those. And some of you might see less progress report requirements in your upcoming grant agreements.
So this again was one that we would not want to see just that brief monitoring continues description. And instead kind of what you have done since the last request. So maybe you're requesting 3 months or 4 months of work on this grant. So kind of be a little bit more specific, maybe on how many sites you visited, what type of monitoring was done, you collected, or what data was collected during that time frame. And this, probably would likely go towards contracted services or just staff salaries. And so if there's any other expenses in there, you could note those and what they went for. And this might be kind of similar to technical assistance too. We didn't include that example, but maybe the status of the designs, how many meetings have gone on, and kind of where you're at with the project and what's been done since the last funds request.
When we're requesting the final payments, because of that 10% holdback, I've technically requested more in receipts than what I've actually been paid. So when I am going ahead and submitting that final request with the final like invoice kind of stuff, do I just request that last invoice amount, or would I include the amount that I hadn't been paid for the receipts I had already turned in?
Right. So what you would do is you would want to reconcile what OGMA shows as far as amount paid and receipts received to your final numbers. So if we've given you credit for the receipts that you've shown us, it could be that your receipts will be more than what has been paid to date. So as an example, if your grant was $10 and you had submitted a request for $9, but you had, basically done all your spending when you had that last request, it could be that that final payment would be for that $1, but no new or additional receipts were coming forward. Does that make sense?
So basically I would just put in the requested amount of the dollar that I've already technically requested, but didn't get paid for then?
Yes.
Okay.
And again, that box at the top that shows what the OGMAS, what we have looked at, that's really key to this conversation. Because again, in the end, you want your amount paid, your receipts to be exactly the same amount. And so you're just going to be entering information to make that happen. At the first part of this training, somebody asked about our expense tracking sheet. We are thrilled to use accounting reports. Thrilled. And remember that an accounting report, for salary, wages, and benefits, you can either provide an invoice that has a bunch of details on it, or an accounting report. So the idea is that your accounting report can double as backup for a variety of different things, thus reducing your paperwork and hopefully making things easier for you. This is an example of a tracking sheet that does double duty. You can see here that we have, salary, wages, and benefits. We can see how much. We can see approximately when the days were. When we can see that this is a journal entry. So from an accounting standpoint, if we had questions later, we would go back and we would be able to say, okay, for this period, how did you get to these costs? The same thing for the travel. They're saying here that they had, during this period, January of 22, they had mileage that they paid. So in some cases, more detail would be nice, but again, this is doing double duty. And again, for your indirect costs or admin, again, they've just done a simple journal entry and everybody's happy. So we're really encouraging you to take a look and see if you can reduce your accounting burden and your time burden and your paperwork burden by moving to using an accounting report for your tracking sheet. So I see that Emily has asked, do we have to upload that document for both uploads area, or can we just upload that expense tracking upload spot? So in the expense tracking upload spot, we want either the tracking sheet or this expense sheet. So if you've already uploaded this, you don't have to upload it in the second part. So, for example, this grantee might upload this piece of paper or this PDF in the first upload, and then the second upload would only contain this this invoice and this invoice. So a total of 3 pieces of paper.
So I just want to double check this example that you've got here on showing this something coming from QuickBooks that doesn't show, and I think this, and somebody else sort of had the same question. I mean, this personnel charge, this doesn't show you guys loaded hourly rates or who the person, who the staff person is for the salaries, wages, and benefits. It also, under the travel, it doesn't say typically what the destination or purpose of the trip was. So that's a real departure from what we've done before. And I just want to double check that there's been a change here and we're not required to, provide all of the information for like hourly rates or destination like OWEB has required in the past.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about the travel first. Remember that you only need to provide receipts for items over $250. So this here, $25, you can just put it on there and you would never need to worry about providing backup to us unless you were audited. Now, you always have to keep your documents according to your own policies. But for items under $250, we do not require you to send us backup. So that's part 1. Part 2, when we ask for a travel log, and again, remember, this is for items over $250. A lot of times what the grantees are doing is they're saying, yes, we had travel over the 3 years of this grant, and it was 10 people. And and they're saying, yeah, and it adds up to, $4,000. Yeah, we're gonna need some information about what happened there. But if you have a policy where once a month you enter the travel amounts and you show, again, like this was the white truck, and then you had the mileage that was under $250, there is enough information there that, again, if there was an accounting question, we could go back and we could say, can you provide the proof that, the backup information that verified that this $25.74 was verified? So similarly, when we go up to salary, wages, and benefits, we have grantees who basically they wait until the grant is all over and done with. And then they say, yeah, we had some employees who worked some hours during some period, and we want you to pay us this amount of money. That is not going to work for us, okay? On the other hand, you can see in this grantee that there's specific periods of time and that there's specific amounts. We're not seeing 500, 500, 500, 500, 500, 500, 500. There seems to be some correlation here of actual time worked to actual payout. Okay. So again, we can see here that, what was the period of time worked. We can see that it was a personnel charge, and we can see that this was a journal entry. It would be pleasant if it said something like 10/31/22, OWEB grant, blah, 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 Joe Smith for source name, and then, 5.5 hours, 5.5 hours site visit to blah, blah, or I don't know how you would do it, but it would be pleasant if you had that. And there are grantees who do that level of detail, and it's wonderful. But for the purposes of argument on this grant, I would accept this, because I know that if we had an accounting question, and if the Secretary of State came in and audited us, we could go back to you guys and say, please tell me how you got to this number of $1,108. Who was it? How were they paid, and all that good stuff? Cindy, have I answered your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. I see. Can I share this example as a document? I will work on that. And then there's a question right above that, and I can't see what it says.
I can read it to you, Tara. Says, so with this accountant tracking sheet, I would not need to submit individual employee timesheets and travel logs.
So, if you can get your accounting system to provide enough detail about what was spent, the time period, the exact amounts, and all that kind of good stuff. Yeah, you don't have to send timesheets. You need to keep them. You need to have them. And if we ask about them, you got to send them. But if you can manipulate the way that your accounting report presents information, boom, you've reduced the amount of things that you have to send us. Yay. Okay. And again, going back to the travel logs, under 250 does not require a receipt. So, if somebody is going to a conference up in, Portland, and, there's a hotel, and there's travel, and there's food, and there's this and that and the other thing, yes, you need to provide your travel log. But, for, going on a 40-mile site visit and back, you're probably not going to hit that $250 threshold.
There's a couple more questions, Tara. Somebody is wondering if we could share this example as a document. I think that's a really good suggestion. And then also, can you please confirm what is required to claim indirect costs? For example, 10% of expenses claimed.
Nothing. The federal government has said that the federal government has said that you guys get 10%. Just put it on there. Have a nice day. The only exceptions to that are federally negotiated indirect cost rate. And again, that is a federal issue. And so you're just going to put the amounts that you're charging for your federally negotiated indirect cost rate on the sheet of paper and then move on. Or there are a few grantees who are utilizing the OWEB negotiated indirect cost rate. And that is a whole kettle of fish, a whole set of receipts, lots and lots of math. Don't do it. Call it a day. Do what you want to do. Does that make sense? And I think Susan is the one who asked that question. So does that make sense to everybody? I think most of you have seen this receipts. We're talking about it. Again, we only need actual receipts for items over $250. And we're asking for things on the receipt that are specific, such as the invoice number, who is selling it, who is buying it, when it was sold, what was purchased, and what was that total page. As a reminder, we can't take quotes, we can't take statements, variety of different things. It's got to be something that shows this is what we paid. I'm truly believing we're getting close, and also we're running out of time. I wanted to give the project managers a chance to talk about this. The most important thing, though, that you can do is to communicate with your project manager. They can help you out in so many ways. Mark, take it from here.
You're on mute, Mark.
Helps if I unmute. I'm using a headset with a mute arm, and I've got mute on my thing, so I'm technologically challenged as well. So when we say project managers, sometimes we don't always differentiate between OWEB project managers and then the project manager from your organization. As default, I think it doesn't hurt to communicate with both. So if you've got a question about a fund request or description or anything like that, always give your project manager from OWEB a call, or Tara or Leilani are always happy to hear from you as well. And again, just to underscore the importance of fiscal folks, talk to your project manager of your organization, and vice versa, because what we don't want is the surprise shock when you just thrown a grant agreement on your desk and say pay these receipts, and you're like, what? I didn't even know we had this project. But with that being said, I definitely appreciate all of the folks that came today and participated. I can't believe, I think at one point we had like 88 participants, so that's just amazing. Thank you so much. And we are recording this.
Thank you, and thank you guys.